What if I told you that one of the biggest challenges to American power in this crisis is not coming first from an aircraft carrier, a missile battery, or even a battlefield? What if it is coming from a city built on trade, finance, ports, and price signals? Because that is the story almost nobody is explaining clearly. When people hear Strait of Hormuz crisis, they think of Iran. They think of the U.S. Navy. They think of warships, sea mines, missile threats, and oil tankers trapped in one of the most important choke points on Earth. And yes, all of that is real. But if you stop there, you miss the deeper shift already happening underneath the headlines, because this is no longer just a military standoff. It is now a test of who really has leverage in the global energy system when the old routes start breaking down. And that is where Dubai enters the picture. Not as a frontline army, not as a superpower, but as something more dangerous in a crisis like this: a commercial nerve center, a pricing hub, a financial gateway, and part of a Gulf system that is quietly proving that power in the energy world is no longer controlled by guns alone. Stay with me, because once you see this clearly, the entire crisis looks different. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another narrow waterway. In normal conditions, about a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas moves through it. That means when Hormuz slows down, the shock does not stay in the Gulf. It moves into fuel prices, shipping costs, inflation pressure, fertilizer markets, refining margins, insurance premiums, and political nerves from Asia to Europe to the United States. Reuters reported this week that the blockade created the worst disruption to global energy supplies in history, even as ceasefire talks between Washington and Tehran began in Islamabad. Now here is the part most people miss. If Hormuz is the choke point, then the real question is not only who can threaten it. The real question is who can still function when it is threatened. And that is where the UAE, and especially the wider Dubai-Fujairah commercial system, suddenly matters far more than many in Washington are comfortable admitting. Because while the U.S. can deploy destroyers and announce mine-clearing operations, Dubai and the UAE sit closer to the commercial machinery that actually keeps energy moving. Reuters reported today that the U.S. military has begun setting conditions for clearing mines from the strait, and 2 American warships have already moved through the channel. But even that does not automatically restore normal trade. Shipping had fallen to less than 10% of normal levels earlier this week, and only a handful of tankers have resumed movement through a trial route that avoids some of the danger zones near Iran's Larak Island. That is the difference between military access and commercial confidence. One is a show of force, the other is a functioning market. And markets do not reopen just because a navy says they should. They reopen when ship owners, insurers, traders, refiners, banks, and governments believe the risk is manageable. That is exactly why Dubai matters here. Because Dubai is not just a city. In the global energy system, it is a signal processor. It is tied to the benchmark that helps price a massive share of Middle Eastern crude. Reuters reported that the Dubai benchmark is used to price roughly 18 million barrels per day of oil, nearly a fifth of global crude supply, and the Hormuz disruption has put that benchmark under severe stress. Some traders told Reuters the benchmark was effectively broken during the crisis because so much of the oil behind it could no longer move normally. Think about what that means. The United States can project force into the Gulf. Iran can threaten the choke point. But Dubai influences something neither side fully controls in real time: how the market itself values the oil. And in an energy war, pricing is power. Because once pricing becomes unstable, the pain multiplies across the system. Asian refiners pay more, consumers pay more, hedging gets distorted, supply contracts become harder to trust, traders rush toward alternatives, and suddenly the battlefield is not just the strait. The battlefield is the structure of the market. Now here is where it gets even more strategic. When this crisis intensified, one of the few major bypass tools available in the region was the UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which can move roughly 1.5 million barrels per day outside the Strait of Hormuz. It links Abu Dhabi's fields to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, allowing some crude to avoid the choke point entirely. Reuters says Fujairah exported more than 1.7 million barrels per day of crude and refined fuels on average last year, equal to about 1.7% of daily global demand, and that the port also has 18 million cubic meters of storage capacity, making it one of the world's major energy storage and blending hubs. That is not symbolic relevance. That is hard infrastructure, and it reveals something uncomfortable for Washington. The old model says that in an energy emergency, the U.S. Navy secures the sea lanes and the market follows. But this crisis is showing a different reality. Even when the U.S. moves militarily, the countries and commercial hubs that own the pipelines, the storage, the blending facilities, the export terminals, the benchmark grades, and the financial channels can shape outcomes just as much, and sometimes more. Dubai's challenge to U.S. power is not that it can overpower America. It is that it exposes the limits of American power. Because Washington can try to reopen Hormuz, but it cannot command trust into existence. It cannot order insurers to ignore risk. It cannot instantly repair pricing mechanisms. And it cannot easily replace the local infrastructure and financial plumbing built by Gulf states over decades. Now let's go one level deeper. There are really two Dubais in this story. The first is Dubai, the benchmark, the pricing reference used across huge parts of the oil trade. The second is Dubai, the financial and commercial hub, the place where money, companies, commodities, and sanctioned networks often pass through complex systems that are hard to fully control. Reuters Breaking Views reported this week that Dubai has long functioned as a safe haven for Iranian-linked money and trade networks, and that a U.S. Treasury report published in October 2025 detected $8.6 billion in Iran-linked flows across the UAE and other Asian hubs in 2024, with more than 70% involving UAE-based entities, and almost all of those traced back to Dubai. The commentary also noted that estimates of Iranian-linked assets in the UAE reaching around $50 billion are plausible, even if opaque. Now this is where the story stops being just about tankers. Because in a true energy war, money routes matter almost as much as oil routes. If Tehran can pressure the strait, and Washington can pressure militarily, then Dubai sits in a third position, potentially holding a quiet financial lever that neither side can ignore. Freeze too much Iranian-linked money, and you hurt Tehran, but you also risk damaging Dubai's own reputation as an open global haven for capital. Leave those flows untouched, and you preserve the model, but you also preserve channels Iran may still benefit from. That is not a side issue. That is strategic ambiguity turned into a business model. And this is why Dubai's position is so fascinating. It does not want the strait weaponized. It does not want a prolonged regional war. It does not want to destroy its own appeal as a safe place for capital. But it also does not want to remain hostage to a system where Iran can squeeze the Gulf and the U.S. decides the military tempo, while Gulf economies absorb the shock. Reuters reported that UAE official Anwar Gargash said guaranteed use of Hormuz must be part of any U.S.-Iran deal, and ADNOC chief Sultan Al-Jaber said the strait must reopen without conditions. Those are not casual remarks. They are signals that the UAE wants the rules of the energy system rewritten in a way that reduces both Iranian leverage and dependence on U.S. emergency intervention. That is the real challenge, not to American strength in a direct military sense, but to the American-centered assumption that security comes first and commerce obediently follows. The Gulf states are showing the opposite. Commerce now shapes security. And the market is punishing everyone who fails to understand that fast enough. Reuters reported that the Hormuz closure has divided Gulf producers unevenly. Iraq and Kuwait were hit especially hard, while the UAE was partially shielded by the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline. Even so, the UAE still lost significant export value, and Fujairah itself has faced attacks and loading halts. In other words, bypass capacity helps, but it does not create invulnerability. That point is crucial, because some people hear bypass pipeline and assume the problem is solved. It is not. Pipelines reduce dependence. They do not erase geography. Fujairah matters precisely because it sits outside the strait, but still inside the wider war zone. It is roughly 70 nautical miles from Hormuz. It is more resilient than Gulf terminals trapped behind the choke point, but it is also now more exposed as one of the few functioning outlets the market desperately needs. Reuters notes that with Hormuz largely shut, any serious disruption at Fujairah would force more UAE production shut-ins and cause even deeper market stress. So now step back and look at the whole chessboard. Iran controls fear. The US controls force. But Dubai and the UAE increasingly control flexibility. And in a prolonged energy confrontation, flexibility becomes a form of power. The ability to reroute, the ability to price, the ability to store, the ability to finance, the ability to absorb shock better than your neighbors, the ability to remain indispensable to both East and West. That is why this crisis is bigger than one blockade. It is revealing the future of energy geopolitics in real time. A future where the decisive players are not only states with missiles, but hubs with infrastructure. Not only admirals, but traders. Not only presidents, but benchmark setters. Not only alliances, but logistics chains. And if that is the future, then Dubai is not just surviving the crisis. It is redefining the map inside it. Now, does that mean the US is finished in the Gulf? Of course not. American military power still matters enormously. Reuters reports that the U.S. has begun mine-clearing preparations and moved naval vessels through the strait specifically to restore maritime safety and the flow of commerce. But that is exactly the point. Even after all that power, what Washington is trying to restore is a system it does not itself own. The ports are local. The export routes are regional. The benchmark is market-based. The capital networks are transnational, and the confidence needed to restart the machine cannot be manufactured by Pentagon statements alone. That is why this crisis feels so unsettling, because it shows that the world's biggest military can still find itself chasing the consequences of a commercial system built by others. And right at the center of that system is Dubai, not always visibly, not always officially, but unmistakably. Through the benchmark that prices the barrels, through the free zones that move the money, through the Gulf network tied to Fujairah that helps bypass the strait, through the Emirati push to demand a new regional security arrangement where Hormuz cannot be used as a recurring weapon. That is not military dominance, but it is strategic leverage. And in an energy war, leverage is often what matters most. So, when people ask who is challenging U.S. power in the Strait of Hormuz crisis, they may be asking the wrong question. The better question is this: who is exposing the limits of what U.S. power can actually do on its own? Iran does that through threat, but Dubai does it through function. Iran can shut the valve. America can send ships. But Dubai and the UAE are showing that the side closest to the market's wiring may be the side that matters most when the whole system starts shaking. And that is why this is not just a naval crisis. It is not just an oil crisis. It is a crisis of who really governs the global energy order when war, trade, finance, and infrastructure all collide at once. And the answer, increasingly, is not Washington alone. It is the hubs that can keep the system alive while everyone else is trying to control it.